Shut up and sit down.
In 1826, the New South Wales government established the first colonial settlement on the western side of Australia. It is now the ex-administrative seaside agricultural and tourist town of Albany. It's very similar to other agricultural towns I've visited so far on my journey, like Rockhampton and Cross Harbour. On the northern slopes of Mount Melview is where the modern-day residential centre is. From there they overlook Middleton Beach on the harbour of King George Sound. On the south side of the mountain is the location where the original town. It's very much steeped in history, like other historical areas such as Balmain in Sydney, where the locals have done much to maintain its legacy. For example, they've kept the original town hall, restored the customs building into a university campus, while maintaining the old railway station as the Great Southern Marine Research Facility. On the southern side of the town are two deep harbours that make Albany an ideal location to host large ships, and was the final stepping off point for the Anzac Flotilla during World War I. To commemorate this, they've turned the old army base into a very extensive war memorial to the diggers who fought in Northern Africa. There's also a Navy memorial for the Pacific focus on the HMAS AE2, the only Royal Australian ship lost to enemy action during the Great War. The town also hosts a massive agricultural port, with about 3/4 of the export being grain and about 1/5 wood chips. The port also handles large cruising ships that dock during the summer months. Oyster Bay is at the northernmost harbour and is very calm, making it an ideal location for water sports and a better anchorage for smaller boats. Across the deeper harbours, King George Sound and the Royal Princess Harbour, is the Tornerup National Park, and from there I was able to get my first good look at the Southern Ocean. It's pretty much like the Pacific, just colder. The beaches have a lovely white sand consistent with the rest of WA. Albany's historic whaling station is also on the peninsula, remembering what life was like with the demand for blubber before the times of crude oil. There's also a blowhole that was too high in elevation for any water spouts. I used to think the one in Wollongong was quite unique, but now I'm finding them everywhere. There was also a lookout over the Jimmy Newells Harbour and a modern day lighthouse. I don't know why they built such a plain concrete structure, when in a modern day they probably could have gotten away with just a strobe light on a pole. The coastal vegetation was also very interesting, as it housed an amazing array of birds amongst many flowering shrubs. My hat goes off to all those bird photographers, as I really don't have the patience to wait for a bird to jump into frame. I was also lucky to visit the park when there was some coastal swell, making for some spectacular crashing waves amongst the rocky shoreline. Originally, when making my way to Albany, I passed the surf gallery, but it was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. I thought it was an interesting stop, and while heading westwards along the coast back to Denmark, I decided to pop in. So far, many of the tourist stops here in WA are either historical landmarks or buildings, agricultural businesses such as vineyards, or some geological feature such as an outlook or a unique plant life. The surf gallery was something different, and I made an effort to come and have a look. In some ways I was hoping for more girls in bikinis, but I found a working customised surfboard manufacturer and a museum dedicated to pre-21st century surfboards, with predominantly a male subculture, and disappointingly didn't find one picture of a girl in a bikini. If Mount Meebu Road from Brisbane to Mount Glorious is the best motorcycling road in Queensland, then State Route 10 between Margaret River and Albany must be the best road I've ridden on so far in WA. And with only 2 more hops to go, I imagine it will be the best in the state. With only a short 4-hour ride, I was able to take a leisurely start to the day and visit the post office before heading out. The road was so glorious with many farms and national parks, and for once Google found an ideal shortcut through Forest Grove National Park that didn't involve a dirt road before bringing me back to State Route 10. Along this route was a series of national parks that stretched all the way past Northcliffe, where I was originally planning to stop for lunch. Initially, this hop through the southwest section of WA reminded me very much of the beginning of this journey up the east coast, where there were many interesting back roads and a lot of places to stop and have a break. But getting to Northcliffe made the west coast reality hit hard once again, as when I got there, like many other businesses in WA, the cafe and the pub were both closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, and the only shop that was open was the general store, which didn't sell any interesting hot food except for some really ordinary meat pies. Getting down to my last 3 jelly snakes, I purchased some milk and I was on my way. Riding through the greater Beedilup National Park, there are lots of tall, straight, majestic trees that I just had to stop and admire. One of the real joys about doing the big lap on a motorcycle is that I can stop on the side of the road even if there are no breakdown lanes, and I can take some pictures or get the drone out to follow me through. Again, on the east coast, there are many isolated examples of such straight gum trees, but here in WA, there are so many large and straight trees that are all packed together. Possibility that many of the other trees on the east coast have just been logged by now, and that the current forests are just all too new, but it was a real joy to ride amongst them. Back on National Route number 1, Mount Franklin National Park must be one of the largest national parks when adding all of its adjacent parks together. The highway just snaked its way through a glorious part of this country. Most of the roads off the highway were dirt, but I was still very tempted just to follow one to have a look. Then came the sign for the Valley of the Giants. I jumped on the opportunity to have a break and explore this section of the journey. The giant red tingle trees were just the icing on the cake, with so many other fabulous tall trees through the entire day's journey. It did remind me of the giant red river gums that line the Cross Creek at Cross Harbour, and I didn't have to pay $21 to walk through those ones. The truss walkways through the treetops wobbled so much that it really did make me feel I was totally drunk. The accommodation is very compact, a 1920s style, one-bedroom furnished apartment. I purchased a pizza and had to cut off 2 edges to make it small enough to fit into the oven. But in saying that, after a week of cold dinners, I was still very thankful of having a microwave and a conventional oven. Otherwise, the place feels like a hotel foyer. Everything is painted some shade of beige. In some ways, my path through Western Australia has been very comfortable, and like all my other stops, I could have really easily stayed here for months. The chain continues coming loose, and I continue adjusting it. I've managed to book the bike in for a service while in Adelaide, and I've requested them to replace the chain and the sprocket. I don't know if the chain will stop stretching before it gets to the adjustment limits. I'm also concerned about the dirt roads that I'm going to have to cross with Lake Garnier National Park and Lake Eyre. I think I'm going to have to rely on those kind-hearted caravan towing 4x4s to make sure I get back to civilization if it breaks. Still with Big Town NBN and 4G, so far I haven't had to use the Starlink dish, and while in Albany it's still no exception. The new phone is useful, the zoom feature is difficult, you can even notice the wind blowing while I'm trying to hold it still. Maybe I have to use a tripod in the future, but that'll let people know I'm zooming right in. The new batteries for the drone now give me an hour-and-a-half flight time, so I can have some fun experimenting with it. Albany is a larger town with a greater historia than I was expecting. On the southern coast it is quite a unique beauty that I'm guessing I'm going to find all the way along back to the east coast. Many of the locals have an artistic flair with sculptures in their front yard and well-grounded agricultural heritage. It's not a bad place if you're into tourism or enjoyed raising animals in small lots of land. It was an interesting sight to see a paddock full of deer, but I can only guess what someone would want to do when buying one. I mean, do you hunt it before you eat it? I've now booked my path through Tasmania and only need to plot my way through Victoria and southern New South Wales. I expect to be in Tassie over the Christmas and New Year's break. I guess my usual Christmas routine of meeting up with my Uncle Kim and his boys for lunch will have to wait until I get back to Sydney, which now looks more likely to be sometime in March. I originally expected this journey to take about 6 months, but it now looks more likely to take a year. And if I could plan this trip again, I would have given myself 2 years to complete the lap, and that would have given me extra time to explore and allow for rainy days. I have 1 more week left here in WA, and I've enjoyed every stop so far that I could have easily doubled the amount of time I stayed at each location. Southern WA is a very unique place where there are small pockets of trees that are forced to grow tall and straight, while the unstable, sandy soils allow for smaller, flowering shrubs to bloom. And I'm still undecided about my favourite Western Australian sign, the quokka or the bandicoot. Next stop is Esperance via Lake Grace. This will be the last stop before the daunting 2,500 kilometre ride across the Nullarbor. Thanks for following my adventures around Australia, and remember to go out there and do something to enjoy your day.